Godmorgen og velkommen til. Vi er lige ved at vente på, at de sidste de kommer rullende ind her, så stay tuned. And in English, good morning and a very warm welcome. We're just waiting for the last people to enroll, so stay tuned. And people keep coming in. You are at the right place. Just stay tuned. We're just waiting for all of the participants to be logged in. Good to see more people coming in. Very warm welcome to all of you. We will start in a minute. Yeah. It is now 9 o'clock, so we will start this seminar. A very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Mette Amdi, and I am program managing a lot of our fantastic programs here at CBS Executive Fund. I am so privileged to invite you for this next 45 minutes morning brief, where we are going to have a dialogue on creating value in the circular economy. And actually, sustainability is one of the things that we are very occupied with here at CBS Executive Fund. And actually, this morning brief that we're having today is number 6 in our little series of one of the initiatives that we're doing in order to try to make a lot of you leaders and managers out there and your organizations pulling towards a more sustainable world. So don't panic if you haven't been able to participate on the previous 5 sessions. We will send you a link afterwards where you can actually find the previous sessions as well. So, yeah, I am very privileged that today with me I have 2 of the absolute thought leaders within this area, Andreas Rasche, professor from CBS, and Julia Binder, professor from IMD. I will give a proper introduction in a minute, so stay tuned. We are happy to announce that actually today we are more than 250 people who have signed up for this morning brief. So this gives such a wonderful feeling of the fact that we are many people pulling in the right direction towards more sustainability on the agenda. So welcome to all of you. During the session, we will have a Q&A in the bottom. You will be able to ask questions. And so Andreas and Julia will monitor these questions coming in. So please feel free to just ask whatever you feel, and hopefully we'll be able to get through the questions as we go. So don't sit and wait, just ask whenever you feel for it. And also, I need to say that this session is also being recorded. So if you need to leave at some point or whatever, don't worry, we'll send you the recordings afterwards. And on top of that, we would like to start in a minute with you being active. So please have your phone ready. Normally, it's not a problem. It's normally pretty close to where we are, because we will ask you to answer a question with your phone in a minute in order to make a little interactive exercise to begin with. Yeah, but as you know, this session will be an informal dialogue between our 2 professors, and it will be centered around 3 questions within the topic. And those questions, if you should have forgotten, are these 3 questions. So the first questions that our experts are going to discuss is, what are the key success factors when moving from linear to circular business thinking? And the next question will be, which circular economy myth can impede implementation efforts? And the final question would be, which future development regarding circularity should companies prepare for? So these are some very nice questions, I think, and I'm looking so much forward for our experts to deep dive into this. Yeah, but just a few more words on our experts today. we have with us Julia Binder, who is a professor of sustainable innovation and business transformation. She's also program director of IMD's program called Creating Value in the Circular Economy, very relevant. And she's also a renowned thought leader. And her research and teaching delves into the complex processes, strategies, and mechanisms enabling business leaders to integrate economic, social, and environmental impact into business models. And a very warm welcome to you, Julia.
Thank you
so much. Such a pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. And our own Andreas Rasche, who's a professor of business professor of business and society at the CBS Center for Sustainability. Andreas's research examines the intersection of corporate sustainability, sustainable finance, and the political role of firms. Andreas's research has been published in several top-tier international journals, and he has won several awards for his executive teaching, and he's teaching a lot of different both leadership and board programs here at CBS. So a very, very experienced expert panel. Once again, welcome to both of you. Looking forward to hear more from you guys. But to begin with, as I said, we would like to start with the participants being a little active. So, dear listeners, all of you, please find your phone and scan the barcode and answer the question that you see in the top. In your view, and it's very important that it's a very, very short sentence, otherwise this word cloud will go crazy. So just in maximum 1, 2, 3 words. In your view, what is the biggest challenge in the transition towards circularity? Please take a second to give just your immediate thought on this, and then we will have a dialogue from there. Thank you. Yes, you got it. Good things coming in. Yeah. Yes. Lovely. So, Andreas, Julia,
yes, I'm
what do you
looking at
see?
it. Yes, I mean, it's really interesting. It's, you know, for a researcher, there's nothing more exciting than to see data unfolding live in front of you. So this is like the best thing ever. But yeah, I mean, Julia, what do you make out of this? Biggest challenges? I see some patterns here around change management. So a lot of it is also leadership focused, right? Complexity, awareness. Do you also see this in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we see here is very much reflective of what we see also in our work with executives a lot. And this is basically a lot of complexity, right? So this is not an easy one. This is so, and we can address it, but clearly this is nothing where you change an organization overnight. We see here economy and a lot of the other aspects that relate to economy. How do we even change our economic system to better accommodate for a circular economy? In many ways, we are what I call locked in a linear economy. And I think this is what we see here as well. And also, if you look at this growth focus, this is part of this economic thinking that we have all been socialized into for many, many years, and which, let's say, the circular economy at least questions, even though they provide some very tangible ways to nevertheless reconcile this aspect of how can we have economic growth while decoupling it from resource consumption. But I think a lot of very, very important and very realistic challenges that all of us face as we're now moving towards more circularity.
What do you make out of, because I also see a pattern around mindset and self-belief holding leaders back. I think that's really interesting, right? Do you think we are mentally there yet from a leadership perspective, but also more from a consumer perspective?
Yeah, so from a leadership perspective, I think what is interesting is that what we're currently witnessing is that the role of business and society is changing, right? We're coming from a world where all of us have been socialized and educated into, which is the role of the business is business, right? The business of the business is the business. This is our major task. And now we're suddenly challenging leaders to say, actually, is there another role that business should play in society? And what I see is that most leaders are not in one or the other paradigm, they're stuck in the middle. They're still very much incentivized in their day-to-day activities and in all of their bonuses and in everything they do in this business of the business. So economic growth, by all means. And then they get this other signal that says, yeah, but let's also do good. Let's focus on stakeholders. So I think it's not so much the mindset and self-belief holding leaders back. There might be an element of it. I don't want to discount it, but I really think it's more the practicalities. If I hear all the time, we need to be more sustainable, we need to do more for people and planet, but I'm only incentivized and I'm only focused in my day-to-day work on the economics, then it's very difficult to really bring this to life and to really execute accordingly.
Yeah, and I very much echo that. I just remember, I think there was a study that came out 2 years ago on ESG incentives, which basically shows that the incentives for that also relate to circularity are simply not ambitious enough, right? I mean, these are usually the low-hanging fruits. So even when companies consider it, it kind of is an incentive that is rather easy to meet, for instance, in terms of scope emissions or things like that. So I think the study that I'm referring to here, they found that 86% of the ESG-related bonuses, they are being cashed in, which of course begs the question, I mean, how much of a motivating effect do you have if you more or less know that the bonus is yours, right? Yeah. So really, thank you to all of you. I mean, this is really interesting. I did a screenshot of it because I think we will also come back to that. Julia, let's maybe move towards the first question here, which is around success factors. And of course, it relates also a little bit to what we have on the slide here. When moving from linear to circular thinking, I mean, if you think about these success factors through all the research you've done, and you've done a lot of research in this area, what would you say, what would you see as the most important success factors of this transition?
Let me start with where I think on a broad level, this is the number one most important thing. And then there are a couple of very practical, what I would say, key drivers, key enablers. The number one most important thing, and I think if we look at the circular economy, it's not that the idea of the circular economy is fundamentally new. I remember I wrote my master thesis 2011 around the circular economy, right? So this is quite some years ago. And since then, if we look at it, it's not that circular economy is everywhere and it's now, it really has fulfilled its potential. It has somewhat remained as a hypothetical theoretical promise. And so what is the gap? Why do we not see that implemented in practice? And I think from my perspective, a lot around circularity has been very much discussed in terms of what's the impact case? How can we create environmental impact? And arguably, this is very important. And all of us in this call, I guess, have some kind of sensitivity for this issue. But I think to make it work in the business world, the number one key success factor is I think we need a business case. We need to align the impact case with the business case. If we don't have a functioning business model, then honestly, it will be very, very difficult to bring circularity to life. I think even if we move beyond circularity, and Andreas, I'm curious to see what you think. One of the things that I'm seeing when we talk about sustainability is that oftentimes we remain very much initiative-based, meaning that, yes, we have a lot of initiatives. They keep us busy. They give us the illusion of progress, but they're not meant to scale. We're not very strategic in terms of how could they really replace our business models? How could they really make an impact also from a business lens? And for me, oftentimes, this is because we have this gap between impact case, business case. So for me, really the number one key success factor, and then I have a couple of enablers, is this impact and business case. And I'm wondering how you see that in your work.
Yeah, I also see it like this. I mean, we construct business cases very often, right? And I see this also with the companies that I work with, and they kind of say, oh, we need to construct this business case. And to some degree, of course, this is understandable, but it also shows that very often, the business cases are not obvious enough. I mean, we really need to work hard to kind of get these business cases going. And then, as you say, they are often too isolated, too initiative based. And sometimes in my teaching, I'm discussing with the participants, this is a bit like project management almost, right? Still,
exactly. That's what I'm saying as well.
Yeah, and from there on, of course, you don't integrate it into the organization if sustainability and also circularity, if this remains a project in the organization, then it is difficult to push it through the supply chain. So what I usually see as a big remedy maybe is the wrong word, but what I see as something that needs to be done to really move beyond this initiative and project-based thinking is we need to embed the business case much better into governance. So we need the board, senior executives, and the different governance organs of a company. We need them involved in these discussions.
Yeah, no, fully agree. And I think this is where it cannot be a pet project, cannot be a side project. It needs to be, and I think this is what I've been seeing with those companies that are very serious about this transformation towards circularity. These are the ones beyond metrics and targets and all of this. These are the ones who really align it with their growth strategy. They say that this is not just a sustainability strategy. This is really one that helps us to achieve our growth targets as well. I think this is the right way to think about it, right? So I think this is where I see companies really succeed, is when they are able to bring it out of the niche and say, how does it align with our broader targets? And one of the things I also always emphasize, and which I think is important, it's not that circularity is now a new target or strategy next to our sustainability strategy. For me, it clearly is a means towards an end. Circularity can help us to achieve, for instance, our net zero targets, but it can also help us to achieve, again, our profitability and growth targets. Now, you've asked me also for key success factors, and what we've been doing, for instance, in the book that we've just published on the circular business revolution, is we've developed a so-called readiness scan. And here we basically identify a couple of dimensions where we say, internally speaking, how can companies really up their game to actually be in a position to seize the opportunities that circularity provides for them? And we have a couple of 10 of them. They are across strategy, execution, and people. I want to highlight, let's say, 3+1. The 3 that I really think will make all the difference starts with design. So first of all, is design. 80% of a product's environmental footprint are determined at the design stage. This is stunning, right? 80%. And yet our designers are usually neither educated, nor trained, nor incentivized. So most corporations do not have clear incentives for the designers to look at impact or circularity next to performance and price. So here, design really is key. This is, for me, a key success factor. Those that really design it into, because otherwise, and this is something that I think we'll discuss later on a little bit more, otherwise, these whole processes of circularity are not very efficient. If I have the exact same product and I try to dismantle that and get the resources back, very energy efficient, might even be more unsustainable than actually relying on virgin materials, right? So we need to address that issue. So design, the next one, digital. I think digital is a key enabler. One of the things that we're currently seeing, why is circularity now being discussed much more seriously, strategically, and we can really see concrete results, is that we have the digital backbone. And digital is a key enabler when it comes to opening up supply chains to allow many of the servitization models to fly and so on. And the third one I want to hint towards is ecosystem. Ecosystem, for me, is the key success factor when we talk about circularity. Why? Sustainability, but circularity even more so, is not a single company game. No company will succeed in circularity alone, because suddenly we're not thinking in silos anymore. We need to look, across our entire organization. It's not one department that can drive this. We need to look across our entire solution ecosystem, may that be consumers, suppliers, and so on, and the enabling ecosystem of NGOs, regulators, and so on. So these are, for me, the absolute 3 key. And then when I say the +1 that is underlying all of this, it's people. We need to upskill people. We need to get people behind this. You mentioned, Andreas, the top-down support. I would add to this, next to top-down, we need to really get bottom-up incentives to involve everyone in the organization. And one of the things that we've been seeing is that usually these initiatives fail at the mid-management. The top management is aligned, but if I'm not managing to get the awareness, the incentives, and all of this at the mid-management, it likely is going to fail.
It's very, very good points, Julia, and I think we are fully aligned on this. I found it really interesting what you said about the product design, because I mean, this is something also that we, I think, in terms of education, don't often think about, right? I mean, how are these people, first of all, incentivized and then educated? Yeah. Because if you ask them to design for waste, they will design for waste, right? But we have the tools. I mean, strictly speaking, at least I usually see this in my interactions with companies, strictly speaking, we often have the tools to do it differently, but we don't. And often it is because the business case is lacking, right? I mean, that is unfortunately a reality. And that's also, I mean, one of the questions which was already asked is, can we give examples of companies that make circularity part of their strategy in terms of, are they then also financially successful with this? Can you think of any, or can you comment on that?
A couple, right? So this is what we've been really studying in depth and engaging with many leaders on this topic. One company that always comes to mind for me is BASF, the big chemical company. For BASF, They even have a global head of circularity, which is, I think, one of the functions you don't see that often. And she really isn't in charge of how do we bring circularity across the entire company. They, again, see circularity not just as a sustainability strategy. It's really part of their overall strategy of how do we actually create new market value pools. And this is where they completely rethink many of their processes, many of their products, many of their ecosystem collaboration. So it's super, super interesting. So BASF is clearly one of the companies, have a look at them, that is really driving the change. Another one that we actually wrote a very interesting case study about is Decathlon, which all of you, I guess, know, is basically the sports retailer. Decathlon is super interesting. Why? Because they are the ones that really say we need to industrialize circularity. This is the wording they use. They say we need to move away from the niche level, from this kind of initiative level. And they have very interesting scaling strategies where they say, for us, circularity only makes sense if it fulfills 3 goals. 1, it clearly addresses our sustainability targets, meaning less resources, less energy, net zero, and so on, profitability, and growth, right? If it's a growth driver. And they clearly say, and this is a word-by-word quote, we don't see just a market, we see markets, right? And we see that this will be the one where we will be making most of our profit going forward. And I saw also one of the attendees putting in our circularity and growth compatible. I would even go a step further. I would say it is maybe the only way that we can realize growth in the future, because we are seeing currently global resource shortages. These are due to real resource shortages. They're simply not available anymore. But this is also due to geopolitical conflicts where we are very much relying on certain resources. If you think about e-waste and all of this, most of it coming from China, geopolitical conflicts increasing, difficult. China is going as far as to say in the future, all of the materials we source will belong to the state of China, right? So they will only rent their materials. So how can we also reduce our resource dependencies? How do we increase resilience? And this is where I'm saying, really, for me, circularity is the growth driver of the future. And I think this is what we need to change in our thinking. Many still associate sustainability and circularity primarily with costs. And yes, maybe the transformation costs some money, but I think we'll need to look a little bit more mid or long term to see how it can create clear economic value as well.
Can I come in on the cost argument? Because I think it's an interesting argument. And there was a question by Giovanni here. How do you cope with the cost in companies in the design phase, so to say? So how could you justify it, assuming, for instance, that the short-term costs are there, and of course we cannot define them away. So how do you justify it that you then nevertheless go ahead with this?
So I think we need to move away from this very short-term cost thinking how much it costs me today towards total cost of ownership. And this is true on a producer and on a consumer level. And I think what will be very interesting is for companies to look at, and I'm sure we're going there, but servitization models. This is where if I keep these resources, if we start to rethink that companies give away precious resources, which we currently do. Think about this. We're living in a world that is very much constrained when it comes to resources going forward. And yet companies just sell these resources and they give it away, which is, if you think about it, it's very short-term thinking. So if you ask me, how can we justify these costs better? If we design differently and we say, actually now we design for longevity because we're getting these products back and we actually want these materials to survive in the long term. We want these products to be much more valuable in the long term because we can make money with it. We can monetize extended product lives. We can servitize this. We can refurbish for resale and so on. Then have a very clear incentive to design very differently. And maybe one last point with respect to costs. I often get that. I often get that sustainable innovation is more costly or more risky. And maybe to a degree, in that sense that uncertainties are higher. But can we just agree that innovation in general has always been risky and always has cost us money? And I think where we also have a lot of costs is when we remain on the initiative level, because then nothing of this is actually making money. We're just putting into money for experiments, but they're not meant for scale. They're not meant to really actually be profitable in the future. So if we're much more strategic, say we incubate 50 projects, but only 10 then receive further funding and only 3 are really introduced as growth drivers to the market, then I think we can really reconcile this cost myopia that we have.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I would just add to that. And of course, it is important then to also have governance again on board, to have the board on board for that, because the board, for instance, decides about capex expenditures, which are often, of course, tied towards these. And we see too little investment. I mean, the data that I'm seeing coming out, for instance, out of the taxonomy data, which is a good and rather objective way to measure investment levels, is the capex, the taxonomy aligned capex in Europe is around 10%. This is ridiculous, right? I mean, it's how could we ever kind of think about really turning around an economy if 10% or if only 10% of our investments are going really in that direction? So this is something where boards maybe also need a little bit more courageous, where they need to have more courage. Julia, let's maybe move towards our second question, which is a little bit around myths, and I will then throw in also some of the other questions that are being asked here. There are lots of myths, and actually implicitly we also came across some of them already that can impede implementation. Probably the biggest myth is the cost argument, right? That kind of is holding it back. But do you see other myths in organizations, and have you come across them in your research?
Yeah, maybe just one last thought on the cost argument, just because I think we should at least address it. Is I think we see and conceptualize costs completely wrong, because at the moment we externalize social and environmental costs, right? This is something that we as an organization can change. But when we look at the economic framework conditions that you touched upon, Andreas, as well, then I think we need to think about, if we would internalize social and environmental costs, then actually it would be cheaper to design sustainably and circular. We're not there yet, but just as a last argument and thought around costs. Now, when we talk about myths, look, the biggest myth that I always get is, when I say circularity, people think recycling, right? So I was even introduced at an event as the recycling lady. And I was like,
my God.
The recycling lady, A, that doesn't sound particularly appealing, but B, and now this is even more the problem.
But at least lady, Julia, at least lady.
At least. But it should be the last resort, right? So I think one of the biggest myths that when we look at circularity is that it's recycling. Indeed, recycling plays a role, right? And this is, I think, where a lot of this notion, maybe just to step back for a second, is to close the loop. How do we actually circulate products and materials? But now the point is at their highest value. And I think when let's also start debunking some myths around recycling. When we say recycling, what we usually talk about is downcycling, meaning that we lose value of this material with each and every so-called recycling step. So what we really would aim for is, how do we keep the materials at their highest value, and actually keeping the product as such and extending the product life would keep them. So just as one of those examples. So I think we need to move away from really this myth, circularity equals recycling. If we talk about recycling, let's really talk about recycling or upcycling, not downcycling, what is usually happening. I think that is one of the most important myths when we talk about circularity. I have a couple of others, but I want you to react first, Andreas.
Yes, I mean, the recycling myth, I also have come across that, and it is certainly something, of course, which also impedes action, right? Because people don't see the breadth of the debate. So if you always just minimize it towards one small aspect of it, and even just a small aspect within the small aspect, as you said, the downcycling, then of course this becomes not a very useful debate. Have you seen any myths around organizational design in terms of how organizations also maybe interact with other stakeholders?
Yeah, no, on the organization level, I think there are a couple of myths. Let's start with the one that I get quite often is circularity doesn't apply to our organization or industry, right? So, and not going specifically in one or the other, but oftentimes there is this, we tried it doesn't work. Maybe let me just say, the way we think about circularity, we actually developed 5 different business model archetypes, ranging from optimizing resource use, monetizing extended product lives, valorizing waste, capitalizing regeneration, and servitizing products. So you cannot name one industry that would not see business value in all of these. So I think, again, it's because of the short-term myth of circularity equals recycling. But so I think this doesn't apply to our industries. One that I get a lot, that it costs a lot of money. And again, yes, it may cost you at the beginning, but if well designed and if you really have a business case, it will not cost you money indefinitely. And I think another myth that you're hinting towards, Andreas, as well, is oftentimes I see business leaders buying the hypothetical idea of circularity, but they're saying it's too complex. In that sense, we need to overhaul the entire organization. And certainly that would be the end goal, but it doesn't impede that we could actually create value from the circular economy already tomorrow. Because if we really need to think about circularity as a revolution, but the way to get us there is actually an evolution. It doesn't mean that we will overnight change the entire organization in each and every product. We will start eventually with the low-hanging fruits. I think what is very important is that we do not stop there. Most organizations that I see is, if you may be aware of the 3 Horizon framework, right? So the Horizon 3 would be the circular and regenerated future. Horizon 1 is our business as usual. And the most exciting one is Horizon 2, which is experimentation and innovation. Most organizations use Horizon 2, so innovation, to extend their license to operate, their business as usual. Incremental innovation, as you were mentioning before. What we would really need is innovation that helps us to achieve our vision of a more circular and regenerated future. And here we just see too little. And again, I think what is holding us back is oftentimes this perception we alone cannot change anything. The industry is not ready. The regulator is not supporting it. Our organization will never be able. It costs us only money. All of these myths, just to say, have some truth to it. But none of this is actually would hold us back if we're really looking into it and going towards it.
What do you say about the myth that you just mentioned? And we also have a question actually on this. The regulators are not supporting it. There is a lot of discussion here in Europe around regulations, mostly in the context of the Green Deal and what has happened in the Green Deal, of course. So we see lots of mandatory regulations around sustainability. Some of them are actually also attached to the Circular Economy Action Plan that the EU has put out. What's your take on these regulations? I mean, because isn't there a risk that we try to put this too much into the kind of compliance box to kind of say, look, we try to regulate for circularity instead of kind of incentivizing businesses to really be innovative, because you can. Regulating for innovation is rather difficult, at least for true innovation. So what's your take on the regulatory stance here?
I think we could fill an entire morning session on that, Andreas, and I'm sure you have a lot of opinions around this as well. Look, the funny thing is we always called for the regulator to set the framework conditions, right? Now that they're starting to go into that direction, we're basically saying you're over-regulating. But let me step back for a second. I think you're saying it could be a risk that we're getting into this compliance thinking. I don't think it's a risk. I think it's actually happening, right? This is what I see happening with all executives that even thought about sustainability or circularity more strategically. Currently, they're so overwhelmed by the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive and all the mandatory requirements on reporting that they really have lost focus on how to strategically seize opportunities related to sustainability. Now, I would say the short-term thinking would be, the regulation has been wrong and we shouldn't have gone this way and so on. And I think this is where I come from Germany. The sentiment is extremely strong right now. You don't even, I gave a talk there last week. Wow, I can tell you regulation is, they really feel now we need to leave Europe because Europe is over-regulating. I want to say just one thing about this. I think in the short term right now, it's a massive pain. It is overburdening companies. It is not pleasant. It is actually holding us back to look at sustainability and circularity more strategically. In the midterm, it's absolutely necessary. Look, I always say that when I teach executives, I've never worked with the most sustainable company. Every company I work with is surprisingly the most sustainable company that there is. Why? Because basically at the moment, it's very much self-reported. I can claim to be the most sustainable company. I don't even need to show data for this. This is almost like when we look at it from an economic lens, each company can decide we're the most successful company on the market. If we don't have any data that we can compare, then actually everybody could just claim exactly that. And we were at that point with the economic success factors as well. So I think it's important that we're able to really get transparency into this. And again, short-term nightmare, midterm, I think it has value. We should not fall into this trap of just reporting myopia, just ticking the box exercise, which is, I think, despite all the valid concerns that companies have right now, it is short-term thinking. We should not lose track of our strategic focus on the topic. And again, circularity is one of those, from my perspective, the only way we can reconcile economic growth and sustainability.
Yeah, it's very well said, particularly on the regulations. I'm always, when I work with companies, I'm always telling them, look, I mean, it also depends on how you approach these regulations, right? I mean, if you approach it from a pure compliance lens, well, then probably it is a pain. But if you kind of look also what is in it for you, in terms of, for instance, getting better data to manage your value chain operations, getting better data to incentivize people, getting better data also to attract and retain employees, human capital management, then I think it actually becomes a very useful task. So it's at the end of the day, it is also a bit of a framing exercise. There's an interesting question here, Julia, which I want to pick out, and this is about the global south, because one myth that I also hear often is, I mean, come on, all of this is for highly developed economies, and it's kind of you guys in Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, this is where all of this happens. How will the global south be affected? Is a question by Camilla.
Very, very fair and valid question, and I think not an easy answer. A couple of dimensions that are relevant here. What we currently see, because of these global resource shortages, because of geopolitical tensions, we already see a rethinking on more localized supply chains. Should we shorten these global and fragmented supply chains? So this will arguably have a very strong effect on the global south anyway. So that is, let's say, the negative lens. If we were to have more of these resources locally, if we are to have much more, again, of the production more in Europe, which some of the circular principles actually imply, then there's clearly also an economic cost for the global south. I would also like to turn this around as an opportunity for the global south. One of the biggest markets that is currently opening up, let's say not market opportunities across a wide range, so a new kind of market principles, is valorizing waste. How do we create value from waste? And this is super interesting because here, it's actually not the Western world that is leading on these, because we have been, let's say, a little bit spoiled on access to resources because we were able to afford it. The global south has always been very creative in finding ways to valorize waste. They already have a lot of these valorizing waste streams in place. They have been the ones that really find interesting market opportunities from utilizing waste more creatively. So I think when we look at one of these business model archetypes that we outline in the Circular Business Revolution, then I think global south, a lot of the entrepreneurs there, a lot of the companies there are actually at the forefront of leading these markets. So I would say it can be a risk and it can be an opportunity. And I think this is what you always have. With every transformation, there's risk and opportunity. There is a clear risk that, and this is the same as with the just transition, as we're kind of reshuffling global supply chains, that companies in the global south will suffer. We already see that, by the way, not related to circularity, but CSRD that we discussed. Because of the pressure now of scope 3 emissions and supply chain transparency, many companies not working with some of the suppliers who cannot provide and supply the data. So this is happening anyway, and circularity might even be an opportunity for these for these countries, because again, they have been much more creative in utilizing these market opportunities.
Well said and very well analyzed. Also, of course, is backed by a lot of data and reports coming out. I want to focus us a little bit more on the questions because we have many. So let's hope we can move through some. There was one question by Deborah who asked how can we approach circularity in a less linear way. Basically arguing, that we need board level understanding, we need a common language around it, but we still approach the debate in a quite linear way. You're absolutely right, Deborah. And I think education here is a big enabler. I think, so we need to learn also to think in systems. We need to learn to cope with complexity, and this is nothing that you can learn overnight. So. That's exactly one of the reasons why I guess Julia and I we both, I mean, we put emphasis on this in our teaching, and I see teaching here actually as a big enabler to approach circularity also with an understanding of circularity and to not approach circularity with a linear mindset. What's your take on that?
All very valid reflections, Andreas. Let me add one. We need to learn and we need to unlearn. I think a lot of the challenges that we have is we need to unlearn some of our behaviors that basically have led us here. And this is a difficult one, unlearning and changing these mental models. So clearly creating awareness, education is very important. By the way, if we talk here circularity, this is very advanced thinking. Many of the boards, and we work with leading board members, they actually just get into ESG or sustainability. And the question, is this relevant for us? So right here, we're actually putting an additional layer and saying, you not only need to think about these topics, but really look at it from a circular lens as well. So awareness is key, but let me give you one thing that I usually say. I think if we approach top level management, if we approach boards and expos, don't come simply from a responsibility and a sustainability lens. This is what we've been trying for the past 50 years to say, business should also consider sustainability because they have a responsibility. I reframe that. I come and say, look at this from an opportunity lens. This is the language that boards will understand. Boards understand that currently our supply chains are at risk, that we are actually in need to increase resilience, that we are in need to improve resource efficiency. This is a language that the board understands. Circularity, there are different business opportunities, but for instance, increasing resilience, increasing resource efficiency, reducing costs, by the way, actually adding additional services when we think about servitization and diversifying market opportunities. These are languages that relate to the board. So I think, yes, one way is we can try now to educate boards and top leaders, and we should. But oftentimes I feel I'm more successful if I'm not trying to tell them now care for these topics, but I'm saying, you're a good business manager, no? You should be interested in increasing resilience. You should be interested in diversifying your markets and de-risking supply chains and so on. And honestly, here, you usually have an open ear. And this is the language where you can relate this topic. And I think it's a matter of framing. You mentioned before, Andreas, it's a matter of framing. Make it relevant to the people you're talking to.
Very good, very good. Fully agree. I want to take one question by Simon. He said, and that's probably also a little bit of a technical question, but since we have the expert here with you, there is a regulation hindrance in marking the circular product with CE. When you try to reuse it, it needs CE marking since it is a new product. What's your take on this?
Yeah, no, a very difficult one. And you're absolutely right. This is happening, not for every and each product and each product line, but it is true that for some industries, we do face fundamentally regulatory barriers where, let's say, some products cannot be reused and reintroduced because of regulation. This is what I mentioned before is linear lock-in. We're all locked in a linear economy. Our regulation is made for linearity. Our supply chains are made for linearity. Our consumer mindsets have been trained on linearity. We don't have logistics actually that are reverse, right? So I think there are important barriers. This is absolutely right. And for some industries, this reuse aspect is fully true. Let me say that for some products, this is actually only true because there are some materials or hazardous materials in there that prevent this reintroduction. So I think it's also about, we're going back to my point of the key enabler, it's about designing these differently. If you design out hazardous materials, which is a key principles of the circular economy, then you will be able to reuse it and reintroduce it, right? So we need to, and Simon, I understand that I'm not fully maybe addressing your concern because I don't know your industry and background, but we need to be very specific on why is the current regulation not allowing to reuse or reintroduce certain products. Oftentimes, again, it is because there are certain materials that are not allowed to be reused. Can we design out these materials? Would be one of the pathways. There are others. And clearly, let's be very honest, we will need to lobby for new regulation. We will need to get together with other industry players. And this is, again, ecosystem play. You will not win this alone. You will not lobby on your own and win. We will need to have regulation that supports these developments. And again, this is happening not just in circularity, for each and every innovation. And here we're talking about very systemic innovation. We need new ways of doing business supported and enabled by governmental actors.
Julia, we need to slowly wrap up, but I want to go to kind of one pattern across some questions. I just looked through the questions and thank you, everybody. I mean, you really asked a lot of questions, which we cannot all cover, but there were a couple of questions around the scale of all of this. Henry, for instance, asked, I mean, global changes of this kind of scale are significant, right? I mean, is this really something that we can do? Maybe also looking a bit into the future. How would you judge the likelihood really that we can turn into a circular global economy at the scale that is needed to really address the problems? Because the problems are also at a scale where you know, as we discussed in the beginning, a little bit of a project here and an initiative there won't fix it.
10 years ago, my answer would have been, it's ambitious and I have hope, but I don't really see it happening. today, 2024, I see it happening. I see how companies like BASF, Philips, Decathlon, they are actually looking at circularity at scale across their large business, which is around the globe already, right? If these large multinationals manage to make it happen in their product lines, this is something they already scale quite heavily because they are multinationals. Now think about the effect, the snowball effect, because they put their supply chains on board, because the competitors will follow. So can it happen at scale? You know what? Yes. And I tell you why, because resources will become so expensive that I always have this prediction that I always say, when we meet here in 10 years, have another morning brief, Andreas, we won't have waste bins anymore. Because it would be like we put pure dollar bins into the waste. It would simply not make sense. Resources, we will understand, are precious. We don't understand that right now. If resources really get a clear price tag, if there's so many shortages, which we currently see, then we will simply need to rethink. And this is where circularity, either out of opportunity or out of necessity, will come. This is I don't really see how we have any other option. There is one other option, by the way, and I want to talk about it: degrowth or sufficiency. I just don't see it happening, right? So this is where business leaders are even more reluctant. We can bring it in there, and I'm happy to talk and discuss it and think about it. But this is the only other way, and there is no third path. There is no business as usual path, because simply there is no business as usual like this. We cannot have it, even if we would want to have it.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's been a real pleasure to have you this morning on this morning brief. I think that was an excellent discussion that we had, and it was really good to have you here as an expert and to go through all these questions with you. At the end of the day, I'm always saying, nature will force our hand in one way or the other, and that is maybe something we should all keep in mind. So thanks a lot for being here this morning and having this morning brief with us. And for a very quick wrap up, I hand it over to Mette.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andreas. And from my side as well, thank you, both of you. It was such a fantastic opportunity to brain pick from your very, very knowledge brains. And I hope all of our participants will leave with a lot of food for thought and more perspective on the various projects that they are dealing with out there. So thank you so much, both of you. It was mentioned that one of the things that needs to be empowered is to bringing more education around all of these complex situations that organizations will face on this sustainability transition. So thankfully, actually, here at CBS Executive Foundation, we are now offering a new fantastic leadership program called Sustainable Leadership and Transformation. It is a new program which is actually designed by Andreas and a lot of very, very skilled people within this area. Actually, we do have professors from INSEAD and Oxford and many more together with Andreas who have designed this program, which is kicking off in January. And it's a 10-day program running from January to May next year, which is it's a program designed for senior execs and top leadership who will need, more knowledge and more perspectives and more tools to do this transformation. And it's centered around three main areas on how to cultivate a sustainable leadership mindset within the organization, and also how to align actually the strategy in the organization, and then actually do the leadership of the transformation, and to all in all cultivate a literacy about this sustainable transformation that we are on. So this is a fantastic way for you guys to actually further educate yourselves. And also, I just want to bring in that we have very recently announced a new partnership with actually IMD, which we're very, very proud of. So if you're doing this foundational program, you can actually extend it with some very, very interesting accelerator programs that they are offering at IMD. And so you can actually earn a joint certificate at the end. But enough on that now. I will, of course, send you some some links to this if you want to further explore this. And if you should have any questions or you would like a further dialogue around what is actually being covered during these 10 days, I'll be happy to give you a personal call to enlighten you on this. But for now, I just want to thank you again, both of you, the experts and also you participants, for spending the morning with us and interacting with a lot of questions. Thank you so much, and stay tuned. We'll be back with more fantastic content for you in the future. Good luck with all of your projects.
And thanks to Julia in particular. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Andreas and Matt. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.